Hello hero, it's Lucy Lannon. It's good to see you. You've seen the title, so at this stage you know more about today's reading than I do, since I speak to you from the recent alternate past. This is a general, timeless one, ideally designed for quite a large audience, so we won't get as specific as we would in a private booking, link down below. If most of what I'm saying feels like an answer to a question you've been living, take those tidbits with you and let a fellow traveller excavate the rest. If it's not your reading, there are playlists on my channel hub to randomise finding something else. Whilst it's true that a broken clock is right twice a day, I'm not sure that same clock is right 10 times within the hour. So trust yourself, above all, to know what's useful for you and what makes you feel more empowered for hearing it, no matter what your beliefs. While we're on beliefs, on this channel gendered terms are just a specificity of language to describe energetic tendencies and signatures, solar or lunar inclination in accordance with a hermetic law of polarity, and not any kind of socialisation to buy into wholesale or conflate with the identity or orientation of anyone described. Romantic and spiritual labels used are plucked from lengthy precedent predating any unfortunate trending controversies or engineered cyclical backlash. My dude, around these parts, we don't relinquish the complexity of our full histories. We trust ourselves cognitively to adapt what we consume and see what's healthy and long-term accurate. I'm legally obliged to say this is entertainment in quote marks and that I'm an occultist not qualified in unrelated disciplines to advise on physical and mental health, finances, legalities. You get the picture, you're in charge of you. All my readings are protected and warded by frankly magnificent beneficial forces, though I don't share my custom prep rituals on camera any more than I give out my address. I hope the reasoning behind that is obvious, but you can trust there are zero parasitic or adversarial influences permitted within 100 unseen paces of any signal we patch from the noise here today. So sit back, relax into the shape of your most luminous possible future self, cozy up to imaginal allies, and take in whatever it is you need to hear. If you do like it, this small channel with a big mission very much appreciates subscriptions, thoughtful comments, or donations in order to spread the word and keep the lights on. Now, let's tune that dial. Right, Petal, please excuse my nails. I'm between exoskeletons at the moment, which is oddly appropriate for the tone of this reading. There's a very armoured feel about a lot of this. I also apologise if you're seeing this a day or so late. I'm on schedule for the moment, but I just have a feeling, and that seems to be the dark stream running under these sequential events that I'm looking at. Firstly, I should say that instead of a crystal, we had what I call the Yaga stone, which I feel is a Baba Yaga and painted a poppy on because of that. And I don't know whether you can see I did the sort of glowing fire eyes as well. Now I did that a long time ago when I started working with Crone Goddess energy in general. But this is also a sentimental object for me. And I suspect that this is to do with somebody that you have, I don't want to say like a past person or a past connection or anything like that, because this isn't strictly love, nor are we definitely talking about an ex. But I want to say that this is probably pertaining to somebody that you have a lot of time with under your belt. And under your belt is an interesting expression again, because it's this martial stuff. So we got the Yaga, and then immediately we get iron, which for me is like, oh, that's not a red flag, but an interesting flag, right? Because I don't know whether you know much about Baba Yaga tales, but she has a really interesting relationship to things that in kind of Eurocentric esotericism would be affiliated with Mars, and yet she's very much not that. She's much more a Saturnian or lunar figure, and we do have the moon here as well. It's kind of a love-hate thing because, well, the first thing I should say is that whether or not you're interested in working with her, she's a good thing to bear in mind through this reading because of this relationship to iron. So firstly, her kind of, how do I say this? Her almost like cryptid categorization, or her folkloric slot, her pigeonhole if we're trying to categorize stories, which probably we shouldn't, is very much in the realm that would be analogous to something like the Good Folk, where she's spoken of in a very sort of benefic donor figure kind of a way, depending on how you behave, or the kind of classic Hansel and Gretel punitive hag witch type thing who will eat you and is horrifying to look at and has this very sort of Carly-esque energy around retribution and lessons learned and obeying certain magical rules in order to not die. So already she's quite a contentious figure. But then in this relationship to Mars that we're speaking about, if you take Baba as the kind of Saturnian father initiator vibe, right, the boundary setter of certain fairy tale tests that you have to pass in order to live and in order indeed to have wishes granted and stuff, then Mars seems to be both her fuel and her antagonist. She has a particular relationship to a red night, to Tuesdays, to iron as a substance, which is very much a Mars Aries thing. And sometimes it's a love relationship, sometimes it's a hate relationship, sometimes in tales where she shows up as her three daughters. They have very martial characteristics, and then other times they're extremely lunar and they appear to be battling against forces that an astrologer would look at and describe as Mars. So we have here potentially a feminine who is, I don't want to say warlike, but comfortable within confrontation, comfortable within being very upfront about boundaries in a way that perhaps isn't so popular these days, or takes a lot of therapeutic readjustment to get to. Or indeed somebody who's literally got a past with, say, the police, the military, self-defense, martial arts, that kind of thing. And if we haven't got somebody like that in the mix, then this is about the interrelationship of extreme ambiguity, where there appear to be kind of opposite forces with the same sorts of goals, as in to drive us forward, to develop us as people entering the folktale. And they go about it in very, very different ways, and sometimes they're antagonists, sometimes they're lovers. I would even say that if you have come for a love reading, there might be a friends to lovers or enemies to lovers vibe, which was then kind of cancelled out as we move forward. But certainly there is strong martial energy, strong trickster, folkloric, passing the several magical tests that aren't what they seem kind of energy. And then also perhaps an older woman than somebody else, or at least like a presence of an initiator feminine. And again, see my intro for what I mean by that, because it's not necessarily female, but who operates in a more old-fashioned way and also a more tricky way than the other person. The vibe it's giving me actually is like a gym bro at one end who is very combative in a kind of upfront way, and then somebody a little bit older and wiser at the other end who is perhaps actually better at defense, but through methods that are a little less obvious. You've kind of got one guy doing pull-ups in the corner and another person with just a stronger motivation, just as strong a self-protection, maybe even just as strong a kind of David Goggins energy. But they're going about it from a very different angle, perhaps because of the way that they're built, or the infrastructure that they're in, or the way that they were raised, or something about like, Baba's very integrated with her environment. She's very like part of, she's synonymous with her house, right? And with the woods and with witches in general. She was arguably, depending on what you believe about migrations, the first kind of witch of the woods figure that, you know, quote unquote, ate children if you wanted to tell a punitive story, and granted wishes if you wanted to tell a hopeful story. So, there's all of that leading in, but then also the question that I kind of want to ask you is, so are you guys friends or what? Like, and again, you can be any gender, they can be any gender, this can be romantic, this can be not romantic. But what I'm describing in terms of these like ambiguous relationships that are somehow destined to coexist, that the word I'm hearing in my head actually is comorbidity. So you may have a medical background, or someone in this might, or there's something to do with that, or pharma, or, you know, something along those lines. But the way that that operates is almost like a background, again, a dark stream, a chaotic undercurrent to the whole thing. And what seems to be happening on a more surface level, definitely communication reading because I can't get my words out, is one party feels the other party has lost their soul, has lost their feelings, has lost their ability to intuit their way through what was possibly once quite a strong intuitive connection, because we have 2 and we have the moon. So big high priestess vibes. Scorpio may resonate, but it doesn't have to, because I don't really go on signs here. It's more the energy of somebody who's in a lunar mode in tarot terms, or at great conflict with the self. And this is coming across to the other person as you've lost your soul, you've lost who you were, you've become something different, and you can't tap into the reality of this. And for whatever reason, that has meant that work that has been put into a certain connection, collaboration, communication is at a halt, or indeed didn't happen at all after it was kind of promised. Because there's whenever I get Babs and Iron, there's something in here about contracts, there's something about unspoken agreements or things that are understood on a level that isn't necessarily signed, sealed, delivered, right? But is certainly agreed upon, maybe even like societally. I don't know. Hit me up in the comments of what resonates. Again, massive general reading. Please always watch the intro to get a vibe. But I suspect that if you're coming for this, you're the party that wants cooperation, if not reconciliation. You want answers, or you want there to be some kind of dialogue between these forces now. Enough time has passed, because a lot of these cards are about long time. And you want ease, right? Ease was the kind of mystery word we got, and I haven't used these cards in forever. So it's a funny one to come out, particularly because in the free double cards that my friend got with a Happy Meal once, we have the bluebird, who I see as the bluebird of happiness, which fits in with, if you're into Bukowski, you know the bluebird significance thing there, and that might be a confirmation for you. But more generally, bluebird is inner spirit. It's like the inner child. It's the wishes granted. It's the potentiality for something to manifest, which is not just a desired outcome, but the desired outcome. It's like a long-term wish. One of the tarot wanted to come out sideways, which is not usually a thing, but I just let them take over, so it has. And that happens to be the 10 of Pentacles in this. Now, with it being a gold deck, and with that being a very coinsy card, normally I would say that this speaks to money, and indeed there may be finances involved. But in the context of everything else, actually what I'm seeing is that these precious metals are not much in the light of the deeper communication going on, the deeper archetypes moving through the situation. So if this is some kind of thing that was meant to be a financial agreement or arrangement, I dare say that that is second fiddle to just somebody stepping up, to be quite honest, and kind of going, I wanted to say towing the line, which is not a positive way of expressing this, but somebody kind of going along with what was agreed upon. The fact that I said towing the line first implies that whoever it is that wants this ease and happiness with another person cooperating, also perhaps in the deep dark shadow, which we do deal with Babs, maybe wants a bit of control over this situation, maybe wants the other party to toe the line a little bit, maybe comes over as wanting the best for all possible people, and actually does have a bit of that anything on the spectrum between I'd like things my way because I deserve it now, all the way over to obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is not the same as OCD. So unless you know that you have it and you've looked it up and everything, don't take that, it's just for some, right? But there is my control and surrender reading may even be relevant, although it's years old and shite. Because there's just something here about, like, I feel like one of you is being quote unquote difficult, but it's not for the reasons given. And then the other one is saying they want ease, saying they want happiness, saying they want transformation, saying they want deep emotional communication, balance, equilibrium as things once were. So say we always coming into my head as well. But actually there is an element of control from that person. So if that is you, I'm really sorry, don't cancel me, don't click off. But there is, I think maybe if this has been going on for a long time, that speaks to how out of control a long-term situation like that can make a person feel. And therefore it's quite a reasonable response, right? We all have tendencies to desire control. It's just that we may or may not go about actually sort of wrenching that control in specific ways. So you know from your perspective how much you've kind of done or said or passively done to maybe steer this person in a way that has potentially complicated it further, right? This is multifaceted, and it sort of fell off again and wanted to conceal this final card for reasons. And in the facets, I'm sort of thinking two things, which is that one of the people here, I mean, we're all multifaceted, but one is particularly full of different angles on a thing and can switch very quickly in a way that may destabilize the other person. And the fact that this facet is now shining magenta, or it was, tells me that there is an air of illusion about that. And then the other thing is that in terms of facets and colours and things like that, earlier I was watching Kaleidoscope on Netflix because I'm very interested in like ergodic, is that the word? But the sort of literature and writing and things that are out of order or told in a non-sequential way where you can pick up and still get the full thematic scope of the story, the full characterization, the full sequence of events, but it's not out of order in a kind of linear way, as with something like, say, Pulp Fiction. It's completely scattered out of order. It's like a deck being shuffled. So there's something in here about like one of you can come to the situation from any point and say that such and such was a pattern. And that's true of the first year it happened, true of the first day it happened, true of 20 years down the line, if indeed you're looking at that sort of a timescale, many of you on. And then another person is trying to, I want to say, impose a structure on the sequence of events which serves their relaying of the particular narrative. So something that strikes me about this multifaceted, out of order, sequential kind of thing is that, for instance, in a traditional narrative, even one that kind of starts at the end then reshuffles, but one that's told in a way that is chronologically designated by a writer, there tends to be a character arc, right? So you tend to have a person who acts in a particular way, which may or may not seem dodgy to the audience. And then over time, we get the kind of origin story of that person. We start to get into more of the complexities of their personalities. And perhaps even there is an arc of transformation up until the final chronological, but not necessarily the final narrative point. I hope you're still with me on this. I am going somewhere. When you tell it out of sequence, in the way that that series has sort of tried to do, and I say tried because I haven't finished it yet, you take those character relationships and you add even more complexity because there isn't that opportunity to get a straightforward arc. And what I was saying to a filmmaker friend earlier while we were watching is that is more how life works, right? You don't come in at the beginning of someone's story, or they don't hit you up at the point at which they're like, I'm planning to go on this transformational arc. It's bigger than me, but I know it's happening. Why don't you enter scene here and exit scene when that full chronological thing has taken place? That's just not how relationships work. What's more likely to happen is that a person may or may not have been going through several processes, and then you kind of stumble upon them in whatever way. The course of their particular arc and narrative and maybe even redemption is affected by the way that you guys meet cute, if you like. And then it may or may not go in the direction it was meant to, and you may escape a couple of scenes before the end of that process, or you may encounter them 20 years later and it's long gone, or, you know, whatever. 20 years keeps coming up for some of you. So I don't know whether you are 20 or whether it's been 20 years of a certain relationship to family, friends, whoever. But what I'm getting from that is that you guys both came across each other at a point that you both saw the other as being in a particular fixed arc that was beginning either as a result of this communication or connection or project or whatever, or kind of just before it, which synchronicitously fit into like, oh, perfect timing. Well, I'm here to assist you while you're on your journey of blah, 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 right? And we understand this if we're used to talking about spirit contracts and, you know, particularly soulmate relationships, whether or not they're platonic. What I actually think happened is that both of you started processes at very different times. Both of you have unseen processes going on, which are actually like a sort of expositional drop for maybe like 2 months, 2 years down the timeline, or, you know, backwards in time or whatever. And it's much more chaotic than came across. And to view this other person as on some kind of linear journey because of when you arrived in their life and because that seemed strong thematically is a misunderstanding of the cosmic writer's room that is going on here. I think that you came in with a certain idea of where things would go, and maybe even it was that unspoken contract energy we've discussed. But I don't think you'll come out with a nice little neat bow on whatever that thing was, or at ease and a bluebird of happiness and everybody turned out exactly the way we thought. So this tension that's underlying the reading already of this, like, you lost your soul, you lost your purpose, you went off the rails, and I'm hearing Tom York confirming that, right? Gone off the rails, gone off the rails. I don't think that was actually the path they were going to go down in the first place. You might be drawn to the recent reading I did. I think the thumbnail says something about a fork in the road, and it's my Twin Peaks Magician Longs to See deck. But there's something there about like somebody on a path and they diverge, but it's not that they go in a different direction necessarily. It's that they get new info and they kind of loop back round on a similar thing whilst also not taking the path they were going on, right? That may be relevant for whoever this person is that's being misunderstood, whether that's you or them. But essentially, when it's again, we're in the woods, right? We're with Baba, we're with the three riders, we're looking at iron, we're looking at martial energy, we're looking at two combatant parties who go about combat in extremely different ways. And when I say combat, you know, we're speaking to that astrological archetypal tension. It's not necessarily like an actual war, so much as a tension between parties, which can be sexual or which can be conflict of interest. And whatever is kind of going on with that, you're both seeing it in very fixed ways, but it's not fixed circumstance at all. It's extremely multifaceted. So that is the thing to bear in mind when I continue to say what I'm going to say, okay? Ferns may be relevant for some of you just because of the way that light is hitting that. Now I've put it back down. Or I'm hearing in my head Cretaceous period. I don't even know whether there were ferns in the Cretaceous, but it's like hitting off museum brain, so there's something to do with that, right? Okay, so we have this attempt at working together on this that it is just like failed, and I get the feeling that one or both of you then intellectually separated from this and kind of went down your own road, which, you know, very straightforward with these cards. But also a word that's coming into my head is refugee. So there may have been a literal displacement for one or both of you. Now again, because of the complexity of this relationship, whether or not you are in full acknowledgement of that, it's my job to tell you. So if, for example, you identify very strongly at one or the other end, and the other person, say, moved town, and you thought that that was because of, you know, chasing opportunities, perhaps chasing new career options or new intellectual pursuits with all these swords, kind of having a new idea about the way to go. Actually, I feel like this person who left was more of a refugee of wherever they came from prior. And that can be in a very literal sense, or it can be in the sense of there is nothing left for me in XYZ town, or in this house, or in this shared cohabiting thing, or in this relationship, or whatever. So I'm going to go my own way, and I'm going to make it look like this was a choice that I made that's really positive and empowering and all the rest of it. my feeling is that actually it wasn't so positive, it wasn't so empowering, nor was it really a choice. But this person was very good at the trickster thing of like making it look like that's what they intended to do all along. They may even have a sense of ease about them, a sense of kind of Jupiterian slotting into things. When I say Jupiterian, they might have strong Sagittarius as well, but again, I don't read signs, I read currents. And in any one astrological chart, you pretty much have everything there. It's just a case of what's dominant in what area and what overtakes versus what sort of passively stands back, right? We're not all a Leo, we're not all a Sag, etc. That's incredibly reductive, and I say that as someone working towards being a registered professional astrologer with a ethical body, right? So let's be best friends, right? And I'm hearing, why can't we be friends? But then if the choice is between you and them, I choose them, I'm sorry. I feel like if you are the person who identifies as like not the person who left for another place, if you are the person saying, you've lost your soul, buddy, you're completely different, you perhaps reached out in friendship, or you wanted a connection that wasn't a friendship to become one, as well as whatever it was. And what you were met with was, I'm sorry, but it's between you and third party situation, right? So this can be another literal relationship, a friendship, a family or cultural dynamic, a career that doesn't allow somebody to mix with certain kinds of people or demand so much of their time intellectually that they have to concentrate on that right now, yada, 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 right? Third party is not another person always. But their kind of comeback was, I choose that. I'm really sorry. And I think that if that was you, you're really put out because you just wanted a friendship, right? You weren't asking them to sign their soul on the dotted line. You were asking them to maybe set aside a little bit of time so you guys could hang out in a different context and maybe work on that and maybe build things up. Because this, again, is a card of building things over time. For many of you, this is an 8-year cycle because Pentacles for me represent years and we are at an 8, right? But again, time length can vary. I would say between 20 years because I've mentioned it a few times, and at the quickest 3 days, right? So you do you within that scale. Again, hopefully, please like, subscribe, ding the dong, thank you kindly. I'm reading for eventually thousands of people, so take it as you need to take it. Really do help the channel along if you can though. If you're here thus far, it's working for you, you know what to do, all right? Because nobody knows me yet and I'd like to switch from in person to doing more of this. Okay, so if the choice is between you and them, I choose them, I'm sorry. That agreement, actually, I don't think is as straightforward as it came across. It's not just a literal choice of a third party. It's because of this refugee situation, and I know it's a strong word to use if it's not literally that, but bear with me. Because of whatever that was on either side, right? Whoever it pertains to, that's why this person chose the other thing. So if you identify with being someone who was kind of sent into exile from a particular mode of being, from a particular circle, town, job, etc., then they clocked that in you, and for some reason it put their back up because of their complexities, their out of linear narrative way of telling their own story, and for reasons that you couldn't possibly know without seeing all of the facets, they sort of went, no, I'm not doing that, right? That was a red flag for them, or it was something they couldn't deal with, so they said, I'm choosing this other path, right, where I'm comfortable, where I'm established. If it was kind of the other way and they were someone who'd had to go into a kind of exile, even just conceptually from something else, then they chose to go with another thing because they didn't want to repeat a pattern that was wherever they'd come from or whatever they'd come from. Bear in mind that this figure is looking this way to working on it, but this figure actually is steering towards the happiness, the ease. So even though I would imagine that many people are coming to this kind of thinking that the other person is fine and it's okay for them and they're content. I think both of you are trying to work towards happiness in a very real way. And because of that, I would say that even if one has an ease of serendipitous adaptivity, should we say, that I would say both of you are still extremely dissatisfied with where it is that you are in life, right? One person's privilege can be another person's given. One person's like given and privilege can be another person's burden. And that is exactly what's going on at both ends here. So where you may feel like, well, it's not right that they just get to go that way and they've sold their soul and they're completely not reacting to this whole scenario that's been going on a long time. Actually, I think if you were to really sit them down and interview them, they would say, well, it's not right with this other person because they just get to do this and live this way. And I have all of these other concerns and it's just, I can't get that across. I can't communicate it. And that is the thing with these two like energies at loggerheads. It's very conflict heavy. If it is a relationship, I would be really, really surprised if there wasn't a great degree of sexual tension. And I apologise if that excludes anybody who identifies as like asexual. But there's just a thing here. There's just so much martial stuff coming in. If it was platonic, there's that antagonism. It almost makes me think of like the word nemesis and how it's used in comics. And this kind of Superman, Lex Luthor thing of like, they used to be my best friend and now we are this, but it's even more fated that way, right? It's Lex Luthor is so much more important to Superman as his enemy and vice versa than they could have been if they'd just stayed friends. And the other example I'm getting, if that doesn't hit, is for you Marvel bros or gals or whatever, Spider-Man and oh god, come on brain, Green Goblin's son, right? You know the one. Sorry, comics head is not screwed on right now because I've just had a few very chaotic days. But it's that sort of thing of like, okay, is it actually better for both of our arcs of extreme complexity that we come to this place of antagonism? Because if we just worked it out the way that both of us kind of thought might go, firstly, those two ideas were different in the first place, but also it would have been almost too simplistic, almost too chronological. It would have been too easy from the universe's perspective. And you guys would have perhaps gone through more adversity as a unit, whatever that unit is, because of working it out early and then kind of turning to, it's like you and me versus the world stuff, right? And you don't always want to get into that because it can make a person very cynical. It can make somebody's destiny, if it's got anything to do with, for instance, the psychic arts or healing or anything like that, having that me and you versus everything else can be very much like a downfall that puts you on the back foot with people that really you need to understand further or see the complexity within. Whereas having these very difficult one-on-one connections kind of does the other thing. It kind of like forces you, it shunts you into a position. It's a kind of sit down and watch this, where you care about this person or this outcome so much that you have to listen to other people who have other lives and other ways of being. You have to relinquish that control we talked about. And I'm not getting at you if you're seeing this. This is very much something I've had to learn as well, but it's almost from both sides, where the universe is like, yeah, you're both wildly complex, incredibly compelling figures who have potential animosity towards each other, or at least tension, because of a misunderstanding of where you were both going with this and where you've both come from. But actually it's only through that you can sit the fuck down and shut up for a second and watch where the other one has come from and think about what that might mean in a very different framework to your own. So actually there's no loss of a soul here. There's no loss of emotion here. There's nothing leaking out of this. It's very fired up, it's very onesie, But we do have cups present, and we do have the other elements present, right? It's actually quite balanced, but the emotion is not to do with the other person's lack of feeling or lack of direction or lack of correct choice, right? It's to do with the investment of each person in the other one's path being predetermined. That's what I want to say. And I think that's particularly difficult to understand if you are in the divinatory arts, or you watch a lot of tarot, or you're interested in this, because there's so much nuance in coming to one's personal philosophy around what is fixed and what is movable, what is malleable and free will and all of that, and what is destined and predetermined. And free will and determinism I can do a video on, but it's not really, like, I don't want to go there in this reading, because you could be here for hours. It's almost like the greater purpose of this, or one of the greater purposes of this incredibly complex dynamic, is to get you to inspect what it is that you think is going on in your decisions versus the way that the force moves through things, their decisions versus same, where you guys meet, where you guys have like a soul contract, where you don't, and whether it is ethical for one person to exert a certain degree of control over another, actively or passively, in order to get to what they believe is a combined goal. Because remember that on both sides of the political spectrum throughout history, the way that we get conflict is that one person has a better idea about how to do it than the other person, and tries to impose that idea, however passively, however humanitarian performatively, and therefore things fire up, things start to clash, because the clashing is almost necessary to delineate, like, what is it you're really trying to do? What is it we're both really trying to say? Something that's coming into my head with this, and we don't have a dog, but it's interesting because I think I just heard something like one outside, but I did the Caroline Casey Trickster course a bit back, and she was talking about Trickster's energy being woof woof wanna play, and inviting opposite opinions to the table to discuss, to have fun together, to play the game, rather than saying, your opinion, if it differs from mine, is, at best wrong, at worst word violence or actual violence for existing, right? And between those sort of things, or before those things, is a capability to discuss like adults. And I was watching a Richard Grannon thing recently, and he was talking about how the conflicts that were sort of going on in social media recently show the lack of Socratic method. The Socratic method being, I present your argument in full and you present my argument in full before we argue, right? So you know that the other person isn't being willfully ignorant or a bigot or kind of willfully disobedient or rebellious or anything like that, because they've already presented to you what it is that they think you believe, and it's accurate. And that is the prerequisite for discussion, yeah? So there's an energy here of like, you guys haven't got to that place yet, and that's partly why this is going on. And if this is like a very casual friendship, and you're like, wow, bro, it ain't that deep, then firstly, thank you for sticking with me thus far, but also like, can you see how it could be that deep? Can you think on these things? Can you develop yourself as a soul, which is, I imagine, what you come to tarot to do, by thinking about seeing other people in that way and being like, right, if I was to sum up where I think they've come from before I even state my position, firstly, would it be accurate? Because complexity. And secondly, would it then change my position to know the complexity of that argument? Or at least the complexity of circumstantially where it is they're coming from and potentially going to, right? I think, I don't know what to call this yet. Excuse me. I'm just going to sit on the ground. Oh. ogre noises. I don't know what to call this yet, but it's almost like I might put something about trying to preemptively predict or track what somebody else is doing in a very presumptuous way, trying to mind read, when what's needed here is true telepathy, right? Which isn't mind reading in the sense of, I know this, that, and the other about you, and I'm going to predict what you do. It's mind reading in the sense of being present with somebody and receiving the energy of where they're actually at, and maybe even the straightforward communication of where they're actually coming from. I don't think there has been space made, perhaps on both sides, in this connection for a legitimate dialogue. And that's partly because we do live in these times where, I'm hearing it do be like that, but we live in a social media climate and a kind of social climate in general where it is more societally rewarded for us to proclaim our own position in a good way or in a well-received way than it is to have genuine curiosity and listening for another person's perspective. And again, I'm not coming for you because this is on both sides, but part of the reason it's not been easy is that, right, at both ends, that you've both been rewarded in your respective life areas for perhaps having an idea of where the other person is going and kind of shouting that from the rooftops in some senses, or at least using it to justify certain actions, certain refutations, certain stagnancies or cut-off points or barriers to communication, when actually what needs to happen is just a great deal of listening. And something else that's coming in from the amount of wands and from this particular swords is whether you both have the time to listen. And I really understand that that is a legitimate concern. It's a legitimate block for many people. It's like, even if you can persuade somebody to sit down with you and have this kind of deep conversational, non-transactional communion together, it's not always the case that you have the time free in a day, or you can get to each other, or that they have the time free, or that they can get to you. So then you have, again, another layer of complexity, which is like, to what extent do you believe that this is about compatibility between individuals versus universal and even manifestation-based compatibility of circumstances to be conducive to those individuals? You get me? Like, okay, you might be setting up the circumstances to perhaps draw this person back in from a manifesting or a magical perspective, you know, whether they be a friend, a foe, a colleague, or a hookup or whatever. But it's almost like the piece you're missing is everything needs to align, not just where they're at, not just where you're at, not just you both being able to convince each other of the correct position or come to some kind of equal point, but that everything around you intersects with that and that it's good for the world and not just for the connection. Yeah? It's kind of, I think the focus has been on this town ain't big enough for the both of us. And really it's more of a case of this town is so big that both of us need to be completely aligned to be able to understand each other. And perhaps that's why it's taken a while, right? So that other things can come into place. So that all of these other kind of handkerchief drop type moments in the narrative that have happened around you that you've deemed irrelevant can actually go to what they're cueing in this like ergodic structure thing. So that the universe can tip you off with a colour, so that it can send this person to this place, so that this person can be met by this other person in order that you know this group of friends, and that ties in. There's a thing about right timing in that, but more than that, like right timing is still, the emphasis there is still on like, this is the correct connection and we are waiting for the correct time of it. but actually I feel you are at a magical or spiritual developmental stage, whether or not you identify that way, where you can say, it's not just right timing, it's right everything. Is this right for everything else to set it up? Would that be beneficial to the gravel? Would that be beneficial to the essay this third removed person, this like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, is going to hand in tomorrow? You know, and when it gets that big, it does get too complex to understand. It does get too multifaceted for one person. But if you've been watching a lot of readings, then maybe this is your time to say, tarot can only tell me about us two. It can't tell me about the scheme of this in a broader way, or it can only give details of the nuance. If you aligned with me watching Kaleidoscope earlier, I'm not promoting anything, it's really relevant. It can only give me one colour, right? Divination as a whole, magic on the thing, control in any other particular way, you know, socially, social engineering, can only give me one colour. This is a rainbow. This is a whole situation. So there's that awareness that needs to come in before we can get to kind of how it's going to go. Yeah. And I'm sorry if they all seem to be long ones recently. I'm sorry if it's a long one again, but hopefully it's dense enough that there is stuff to pick out and be like, yes, I get that. I get why it has to be this way, because again, this isn't like a final reveal and here's the wizard. It's more that it's the understanding that the mechanisms in place are like a full clockwork. It's not just whether your particular cogs align in your section. Yeah. Truthfully, I would give up everything for you if you asked. I could touch you and get tangled up in you all day and it still wouldn't be enough. Take those literally if it's a romance reading, but if it's not, know that this is a romance deck that I use sort of colloquially, so it speaks to just the energies of a thing. There is an obsession energy coming from the other end to this, right? There's certainly, maybe even from the person who says, I choose something else, a vibe of, but I can't stop thinking about this. I could get lost in it for hours. I would even maybe say that before this reading, the other person or the person choosing something else would be more prepared to have that Socratic conversation, that several hours of listening out of their day, that genuine hearing of the two counterpart energies. And I say counterpart in a sense of nemesis as well. And not just kind of, because this might not be twin flame, it might not be soulmate, it might not be a relationship. But it's fated in the sense that you had to contractually wake each other up to the amount of things that are going on in every single person-to-person human dynamic. Okay, so we have the Three of Cups. And again, many of you know this can be third-party energy, which we sort of had confirmed. But it can also be just like socialization, having fun, what it is that we consider fun. I'm also drawn to the way that they're holding their arms and the fact that each of them are kind of overlapping a little bit. So again, there's this like, I mean, it forms a Celtic knot, so that might be relevant. But what I'm thinking of is like a Power Ranger power-up or a sort of superhero grip before you all go off into battle. And this kind of, it's collaborative in the sense that combined energies are bigger than the individual quirks of each member. So you might have a very basic interpretation. One of you might have been partying too hard. That might be why the other person thinks, oh, you've lost your soul. But actually, I think it's more about understanding that even if this doesn't go the way that you thought was your bluebird of happiness, the way that you thought was easier, the way that you thought the other party should have been moving, you guys coming together in the way that you have and it dragging on for as long as it has is better universally than not doing that, or than if it had, like I say, gone in a more straightforward way. Okay, let's move into like what might be coming up for you guys. There's still defensiveness, right? We should say that first. And that fits in with this martial stuff, with this iron stuff. But there is also a sense of planning, a sense of looking to the future. And when we come from a reading that is essentially about surrendering control, and then we speak of planning, those things may seem at odds with each other. But again, we've got two cards that are about building something up gradually. And in this case, I think you thought that it was communications or something you were both working on together, you know, relationship or otherwise. But I actually think it's about the individual surveying the whole thing, the waters, right? We've gone from water in the sort of lunar sense of like water sign, which can be quite, well, with the signs I was thinking about, it was sort of a small body of water energy. And indeed, we've got this lovely, like, I don't know whether you can see that, but it's producing vapor all the way through the reading, and I don't always have that on. So there's like small level water, small scale, and then there's this one individual looking at the ocean of possibilities. This situation seems bigger than it is because you're stressed about it, and I don't want to be reductive by saying that, because it's not that it's not stressful. But it is something you've both put a lot of investment and, like I say, obsessive energy into, even if that's in the sense of, I'm obsessed with how hurt I am by this. But actually, and now the vapours cease, right? I'm going to put the light back on, but that is really interesting. There we go. Actually, I think the world is much bigger than this. The scenario, the purpose is much bigger than the situation. So that's not me saying, oh, you're worried about, no, don't worry, it's fine, berate, you know. Sorry, I wouldn't unnecessarily Yorkshire there, but it's not me sort of diminishing the way that you're feeling on either side, or saying that one person is right, one person is wrong, or that the situation is small fry as a situation. It's me saying that this reading is your gateway, just as this other person is having their own gateway, as to how big this can get. And when I say that, I mean that circumstantially, what you were working on versus where you came from, these are very big things. These touch on global issues for many of you, or kind of philosophical issues that are a life's work. And then in a non-circumstantial energy, it's so much bigger than you gave it credit for, because the moon rules the tides. The emotions that were invested in this are a microcosm of the macrocosmic, oceanic, emotional realm of possibility, right? So you feeling ways about stuff because of this person as a provocation has taught you how it is that you generally respond to and interpret other people in a bigger way. And it's done the same for them. And it's not, again, this isn't, I don't want to be reductive, because this isn't a narrative we can tie in a bow. But what you need to understand right here, right now, is not actually where it's going or even how it started. It's the scope available to you if you take how you've responded to this thus far and extrapolate, right? If you take the way that your self-concept has been affected, your spirituality has been affected, your sense of self, your sense of other people, your sense of boundaries between those two things, your sense of control in the world, your trust in spirit, your trust in other people, etc., etc., and particularly the way that you approach conflict and debate, and you go big with what you've learned on a quote-unquote small level with this. And I think actually the irony is that you will be closer to something that you would consider a resolution for this particular situation in doing that kind of excavation than you would by doing something in particular circumstantial, or having a certain thing that you say to this person, or like getting a technical understanding of their background and then doing A, B, C actions to do with it, right? Because really, when we're talking about this defensiveness, we're talking about breaking down the barriers between you and collaboration with anyone. which is why I got the woof woof wanna play and everyone's invited to table. This is no longer about you and your nemesis, or you and your counterpart, or you and your lover, or you and your friend, family member, co-worker, etc. This is about you and everyone and everything else, and what you make that about, right? How you respond to just lifing. And when I say that, for some of you, there will be uncomfortable truths coming to the fore, and that's okay. And I'm being told by Althea here that being around plants will help a lot with that stuff. Certainly within like Turtle Island stuff that I was taught, being around plants even more than bodies of water is very good for emotional development and bringing things to the surface, so that may resonate. Also being under the moon in that kind of melancholia type way, right? But there is processing that needs to be done here, and I think we could only get to that outcome without you being annoyed by me, and hopefully you're not, please like if not, through this long-winded thing, because for such a long-winded life process as you and this person so far, and bear in mind that begins not at the person but at your investment in a particular goal, right? So for many of you, we're talking childhood and your hopes and dreams there. For something that sort of long, I can't then go straight into like a 10-minute reading where I go, oh yeah, it's about how you process stuff emotionally and respond to shit. Because then many of you from like a background of understanding therapeutic terminology, etc., would say, well, I'm working on all that with this person, or I'm reading this book on boundaries, and I don't know how that relates to that thing. And equally, this person is still being frustrating, and you would still be then kind of in the mire, right? You would still be stuck in the bog rather than surveying the ocean, because it's not so much about particular defense mechanisms, particular modes of behavior, particular times that you spoke to each other and what was said specifically, and what disorder that correlates with, and what beneficial, helpful, emotional processing behavior that correlates with, or indeed where that would lie in a debate. It's about how you're showing up general across the full time scale for other people, for yourself, and for an interconnected cosmic environment. Which, you know, it needs a lot of preamble for me to get you there, right? Particularly without defensiveness. And I know, because this is the sort of work I'm doing at the minute. It's a lot, right? You don't always want to think about the greater repercussions. You kind of want to just, you know, have the thing that you've been waiting years for, or feel comforted, or, you know, soothed as to the more difficult aspects of life, the less easy things. But it's kind of, you're ready at this stage in your journey, not only to say, oh, it isn't about me, it's about the complexity of the full thing, but also to look at the areas where it's been about you and how that can be tweaked, or how that behaviour tells truths about who you are, or what your purpose might be, or how it is that you can expand your own complex story, your own almost like performative, self-understood way of moving through the world, so that other people, things, vibrations can interpret you better as well, right? Because it's not just about being understood by somebody frustrating here and maybe coming into some kind of collaboration, union, conversation, debate, dialogue. It's also about, when I'm eating my cornflakes in the morning, am I showing up in the energy that I wish to show up in? When I'm falling asleep at night and using something to help me drift off, am I showing up in the energy that most cosmologically benefits all of this, right? It's huge. And it's a bit too huge, a bit too mind blown to teach you from Spirit's perspective without one of these incredibly difficult connections taking part. Now, that's not to say that this won't go a way that you would like it to go. Perhaps not the way, because because it's a complicated thing, yeah? We've established that. But it doesn't mean that there won't be a potentially positive outcome. What I am seeing is that the outcome at the minute, my dear one, my beautiful little Chucky egg, is none of your concern. And that's not because you don't get to know. It's not because of divine timing or right timing or any of these other extremely frustrating labels. It's not even because I can't see, as a reader, probably where this is going. It is instead because the crux of the lesson was in understanding other people, the way that people different to you operate, the way that you move through the world, the way that they might move through the world versus what you can't know, and just surrendering to those things and handling your own behaviour, but letting everything else be up to them, right? So if this person does choose something else, okay, I surrender, I trust, I find ease. If this person has sold their soul somewhere along the way, to a career, to a group, whatever, okay, that's part of it. Let me see if I can sort of understand better why. If this person's obsessive, if there's like a long dialogue, if you could get tangled up in each other forever, perfect. But let's examine it instead of just being in it, right? If you end up as best friends, or if you're aiming that way, right? Again, that friendship has a greater purpose, and you're being asked now what you think that might be. And again, you're also being asked to surrender that you may never know, but we can get an idea. Tarot is about getting an idea and controlling ourselves. It's not about fate and determinism. It's not about finding, what's the lingo that's going around? It's not about finding a particular trajectory of events and then shifting realities to be on that trajectory because we like it. It's not even about finding the one we don't like and sort of moving away from that. It's about greater understanding of what we can do, what we can control, who we can be. And in all of these really significant connections, again, slight plug for my Mirrored Souls reading if it is romantic, but we're always showing each other how we're showing up. And that may not be a mirror in the sort of literal sense of I'm being defensive, they're being defensive, or I'm being obsessive, they're being obsessive. It can sometimes be they're being the other way, or they're being a slightly different, more complex thing to illuminate that I'm being this way. So in everything they've chosen so far, there is some kind of truth. There is some kind of stuff to meditate on, to pray on, if you are a praying person. And there is magical work to be done there that is not about results magic of controlling an outcome, but instead about petitioning whatever it is that you work with for a greater understanding of the context that has been moving through all of this. And again, this is like the third time I've mentioned kind of dark streams running under a thing. You are being asked to examine the thematic undercurrent of this narrative before you can understand how the structure eventually turns out when it's out of sequence. That's why I had to bring in the sequential stuff, right? Because you need the vibe of it anyway. You need how is this shot? You need what colours are being emphasised. You need what actors do I like at this moment, and is that a designed thing? And then eventually it will all come into a story. But you may not even be privy to that in the same way that you think you will. Or it may come about and may become really clear, and the story was never about what you thought it was. It was just so cleverly done that it gave you a red herring, right? So this is kind of where you're going with this. It's where you're going. It's not about them. There may be conversations coming up. This may be why you're saying it now. But the invitation is that in that conversation there is genuine dialogue, there is space held. So many of these cards have open space in the background in a really significant way. If I was drawing, I'd talk about it as negative space, right? But it doesn't mean it's negative. It means that you draw around the negative space to get the lines of the positive thing. So if you take that in a kind of metaphysical context, you're not looking at the situation as it is, you're looking at the spaces of the things that definitely aren't the case and drawing around them to bring what this person's thinking, feeling, doing into stark relief. And you're also doing that with yourself. What did I not do? What did I not embody? What did I feel was absent? What kind of lack mentality was I having? Or what kind of abundance mentality was I having? Where did I think things were for sure? Where did I think things were an unspoken contract? Versus where actually could they have been wavy gravy, or could they have been up to a broader, more complex cosmological purpose? And when I asked about what this person might likely be going through or where this is taking us, we got green-blue tone. Green-blue's come up in other readings recently, so you might be drawn to something recent on the channel, but if you don't want to see anything other than this, that's cool too. Just give me a like. Green-blue can be about examining the systemic in a more meditative way. So again, it's talking about this process being mirrored at their end of, this is a system, this functions in this particular way. There is an ecology to the dynamics of this relationship. There is a social ecology where one particular set of actions sort of encourages the biodiversity of surrounding actions. Everything has its repercussive interrelationship, if you like. So if I do this, I can probably understand from the laws of this particular system that these things may happen and slot into place. Now, if they are an energy worker, that can be an energetic process of understanding. And if they're not, this is just like, if I behave like X, I can expect Y. And what I maybe haven't factored in for is Z. But to explore that Z, that's where the blue comes into the green, right? That's where the process of descent, contemplation happens. Sometimes destruction as well. And again, we were talking about that sort of Baba / Kali / dark feminine energy. And the fact that so much of this can be about barriers to communication being broken down, along with former ideologies about where the other person's at, what they should be doing, where they came from, for sure. It's like the destruction of the assumptions around the connection, I think. So they're going through all of that, they're understanding that as well. But the tone is that they are understanding that in yin energy, right? They are understanding that with added black, if you like. Or with added grey, actually, because that would be shade, and we're speaking tone. So they're doing this in a way that is urbanized, grounded, that fits into their everyday routine. So for some of you, this person has actively gone for therapy about something that came up along your journey together, right? Because tone can be, in muting the colours, tone can bring in like a mundane force. It's very much like, okay, we get these, archetypal or archangelic dynamics. Now let's put them in a high-rise flat. Now let's apply them to concrete. Now let's make them grey or metropolitan in some way. Let's bring them to the understanding of not just the community, but like the everyday. Let's put them in the gutter dirt and see how it plays out in that way. And that's not like to say that anything from this person's energies has been, what's the word? That's not to say it's been made taboo or defamed or reduced or muddied or sullied in that kind of a sense. It's to say that it's been brought into the practical, been brought into the everyday. Tonal balances make me think of the Oracle in the Matrix, and the fact that he goes to the highest authority on two worlds, two cosmologies, right? And she lives in a high-rise flat with a beaded curtain, and not much money to her, and sort of right in the thick of all of these very confusing psychic energies coming in of surrounding people and environments and conflicts and whatever. It's very much like the mage is brought into the community and made to live in a city. I'm getting New Orleans for some of you. I don't know whether that's relevant, but it's like magically this person is starting to function within society, or within like busyness is what I want to call it, whereas before they may have done their contemplation of certain things in a way that was removed, in a way that was taken out of the environment for peace. You know, think the person on a retreat versus the person doing these kinds of readings on a market stall in a busy street, right? There was something else that wanted to come up with that. Oh yeah, it may be, excuse me, I'm going to shuffle again, sorry, organisers. It may be that this person had a degree of privilege, or one of you did, where they were able to go on retreat when they needed to think about an idea or a relationship or whatever. They may have been one of these very lucky people who can afford to explore things like shadow dynamics and stuff I'm talking about here, not by getting a free reading on the internet, but by paying about $4,000 and being fed gourmet vegan food for a few days and going into a vow of silence with a lot of other extremely wealthy people in togas. It's that kind of sorry, that I couldn't even hide the shade there, could I? But it's giving that energy of separation and almost like buying a space to think about this stuff versus being immersed in it at the same time as other confusing, complex things are happening around you. Now, to my mind, and I have both a class bias and a chaos magician bias in this, I think the best way to deal with these energies is tonally. I think it is to be immersed in what's really happening at kind of grunt level and to see the full cosmology, the full hierarchical stuff play out around you as you're exploring certain archetypes, rather than being so removed from society that you don't understand everybody's perspective. So again, there is a reiteration with this person's energy of coming to a fuller understanding of where everybody came from, in the same way that hopefully, if I'm doing my job right, this reading is doing for you, of like, there are things that you didn't foresee here, bro, or sis, or other. And that's okay, because none of us can see the full picture ever. But what's important right now for both of you, and the process that you're both going through, is to integrate that information and be more open to surrendering the outcome of this to people do be complex or things happen in ways that are unexpected. Now, the difference between them and you, I think, is that they're going through this green-blue tone, but I don't yet see any colour or shade indicator that they're coming to a space of faith with it, where they're like, oh, I see now how the contemplation of these deep emotions intersects with how I know the system to function in a grounded way. And I understand now how to be immersed in a very busy thing and still get other people and where they're coming from. What you have, in addition to all those kinds of energies, that is perhaps what gives you the upper hand portrayed in this card, where they're higher than the onslaught, the attacking energy of like stuff you'd rather not face kind of vibes, is that you have the additional ingredient and assumptions made for this kind of reading and its audience, where you can also put that in the context of, and with perfect love and perfect trust, as the girls in the craft would say, I can go forward knowing this about it and doing this thing. It's like they're getting to a point of surrendering ownership of the narrative about you, because they're understanding that the world is a complex place. And simultaneously, you're surrendering ownership of the narrative about them and understanding that it could turn out every which way. But you're also saying, and therefore, I leave it in God's hands, or inshallah, or I allow this to flow in my highest, in the direction of my highest good, or I allow myself to operate within it at my highest possible vibration, so that the outcome is not up to me, but it is the best I can get, right? And again, that's part of your broader perspective lesson. That's what we mean when we're talking about how sweeping this dynastic vista really is. It's like, it makes me think of like, you might be somebody who's into those sort of multi-generational epic romance novels or something like that, or equally kind of cheesy Hollywood versions of that. Like the thing that came into my head was Legends of the Fall, which is, excuse me, an absolutely terrible, objectively 90s movie with Brad Pitt and a bunch of other people that sort of follows generations of different people as they sort of grapple with this sweeping thing. And there's some of that to this, and especially with this legacy card on its side, because it's not that that won't happen, and it's not that it will in the traditional sense. The legacy to examine for now, because it may change again, and it may become a more literal thing, stick with the channel, but the thing to examine for now is, what is my energetic legacy in this? How have I been showing up? How do I want to show up? 10 generations down the line, how will this connection with this friend, partner, other, influence, you know, my, if not my descendants, then my, again, 6 degrees of separated people? How am I impacting the world through how I'm showing up for this? And I think that they're understanding, like, it's not as simple as it seemed, dude. But you're fully understanding, and therefore I have to act with integrity based on what I can say for sure. And what you can say for sure is how you've shown up, what you wanted, what you expected, and how those expectations have perhaps been obliterated in that positive destruction energy, in the sort of trickster thing that we would associate with figures like Baba, with figures like the good folk, and to a lesser extent with Iron and Mars and all that sort of stuff. Definitely with the moon, right? The 2 reversed, it's this High Priestess reversed. So the blockage that has been unblocked in this reading is not actually the communication or anything kind of straightforward that we might say in a reading like this. It's not even this third-party obstacle thing. I couldn't tell you whether that's still something they would choose or something present. That's for another reading, and, you know, feel free to explore the channel for that. But it's like the more important blockage that's been unblocked is you stepping into the role, any gender, of a High Priestess. You turning that card upside down. You getting in touch with your lunar influences and saying, I can feel my way through this vibrationally and show up in a specific way that means that no matter how complex the scenario, I will be okay. And to the extent that I'm in any kind of control, everything else will be too, right? Because it's that sense of responsibility for others. The witch doesn't just show up because it's fun, or because we're divining the future, or because it's needed for the hero character or whatever. The witch shows up to benefit the whole community. She has the separation of her witchy space to benefit everybody. So you're looking at the ripple effect on the water from where you are at. I hope that that was helpful to you. I am including like another alternate, more spicy form of divination in each of these tarot readings. So if you're interested in getting deeper just through something else, please stick with me. If this is where you leave me, please do like, subscribe, ding the dong, comment. That would do me a world of good. Thank you kindly. And do explore the sort of Lucky Dip playlists, etc. on the rest of the channel if you'd like another reading, or if you want to get in deeper. There's also the opportunity to book with me in the description if you feel drawn to. Obviously, I would love that because this is my day job. But without further ado, I was told to do a birdseed reading, right? And then I was told to do it within a certain structure that I have, which actually makes sense for this. But then I knew that I needed to collect the birdseed afterwards, and I didn't have any spare sheets of paper because I've been doing my astrological exam stuff, and honestly, dude, the flat is a chaos of paper right now. So I took the first thing that I had to hand, which means that we are doing, for my next trick, a birdseed divination with both a DIY altar scrying setup and a John Carpenter vinyl as the base. Because it was the only thing that I was like, oh, this will capture the seeds. So we have here John Carpenter's anthology, not sponsored, but it is very good. And here he is, the man himself. And then this, which was an old altar piece, which had extra stuff to it, and I was told to use for our stuff here today. And wouldn't you know, it fits wonderfully. So maybe there is something about that face or that kind of staring back from the scrying void that's relevant here. Or maybe there's something about John or his movies or something like that. You do you, but let's do our birdseed scrying, shall we? Oh, I think that's quite a bit actually. I don't want to use too much because the pigeons, I don't know whether you've been watching all the readings on my channel, and if you have, God bless you, but lately the pigeons have been tapping on my window quite a bit because I've either given them the wrong amount or at the wrong time of day or something. So I'm like keen not to use more of this than I should because they'll be at me again. Right, wicked. Just think of me as the pigeon lady from Home Alone 2. That's fine. That's where life's ended up. It's all good. Right. Okay, so what do we have? Again, all of these kind of falling outside of this circle are telling me that there are elements outside of the box here that you can't possibly know about, and that they're going to introduce themselves into this non-sequential narrative that we're using for this. So again, it's like it's reiterating what I said, but also the particular placement of the is interesting. So there's some that are going to be, say it more simply, double L. There are circumstances about to come up for this connection that are where the two of you meet. So I don't know whether you have a shared friendship group, a shared workplace, a shared town. There's something that links the both of you. Excuse me, hiccups confirmation. I don't know what that is, but even if you feel like there's not a connecting force between you anymore, there is something you have in common, and the next kind of cog in the machine is going to be to do with this mutual thing. For many of you, I am hearing mutual friend, but it could be kind of any place where you Venn diagram, where you overlap. So if you know that you work next to the Starbucks that they always visit before they go to work, it's quite possibly a meeting. If you know that one of your, I don't know, Facebook friends is somebody who knows them very well, there's likely to be some kind of event or party or conversation where that hits together. And if you don't know what this is, that's absolutely fine. It's just giving you a heads up that like, hey, there are shared spaces or shared influences in this that are more shared than you think in terms of how it's going to move forward. So for many of you, I do see that you might be back in connection with them because of whatever this overlapping two worlds meeting thing is. But it's kind of not going further than that. And again, even like in this, like where it goes into the place where you combine, it's pointing back down to this. So it's re-emphasizing it's not your job to know how that circumstance will be. Don't click off and immediately go to a tarot reading about the next time you see them or anything like that. That's actively avoiding the spiritual work right now. The spiritual work is looking into this unknown, looking into this unseen, into your kind of own reflection, whether or not you are anything like Johnny Boy over here. And doing the work delineated in the reading on the kind of how you show up for things, not just in this connection, but in general. There's also, that's interesting. There's a seed on both sides in this kind of protective mantra stuff that I write around the edge. Now, without going too much into what that is or why, because that is personal practice stuff, what I would say is that you're both kind of praying for a chance to discuss this further, even if the mood is antagonistic, even if they only want to run into you so they can kill you. And I hope that's not the case, but I'm reading for all sorts of people. And I used to live with all sorts of people, so who knows? But even if it's really, really dangerous and antagonistic, there is still an element within which one is praying for the other, right? Whether they're a praying man, woman, other or not. There is, we touched on that obsessive energy, and wherever I see repetitive mantras like this, that is the vibe, because as much as it took a long time to write all of this, trust me, dude, it took even longer to formulate it, chant it, charge it, execute, right? This is all sigillic. So there's something to that of like, this is something they've been mentally turning over and over for as long as you have, right? There is mutuality here. One is coming from a slightly different position. One is in a different colour. But again, it's like if one side represents you and the other is them, yeah, you both have your head in this, right? But that's not to say that you are both after the same things. And I would hope with the tarot reading that you're careful about that and careful about projecting that. Again, like there's so much kind of echoing from both sides of this thing. But all of this is outside of the frame of the work that is to be done by you. All of this is unknown factors. So again, you can't truly know the root of their obsession and why they've been turning this over and over, and vice versa. And indeed, to attempt to do that from just tarot readings or from just impressions you have now or facts you have now in the narrative, I think would be actively harmful to the connection if you want to pursue some kind of dialogue. I think if you've been going from reading to reading about them, now is the time to pause that process and say, what is within my control here? Because it's certainly not mind reading this other person, as we discussed, okay? I'm just going to scoop these up because they're annoying me being at different points and kind of not participating. There's a frustration from you that they're not doing their job, they're not participating the way that they should. And again, with where that fell, that is a lopsided thinking, that is a mind reading type thing. I'm noticing that fell on Prince of Darkness as well, so that might be further confirmation about something. Okay, the nose knows. So at least one of you actually has more of an intuitive grasp of the situation than the other, or than seems evident on the surface. I think whether it's you or them, there is someone who does get what the underlying energy of this is, what the underlying purpose of this is, more than perhaps the other person. And as a result, they're feeling a little bit unsteady because it's like, well, they can't put that into language that states it definitively. They can't apply proof or statistic or this statement equals this thing to it. There may even, for some of you, be somebody who's been like scrolling through things on Google or Reddit or YouTube about like how to interpret the other person's actions or body language or movements in some way, because it's not like they can't do that. And I say they, it might be you, but it's that there is a desire to put what is instinctively known into an unequivocal proof type scenario, because it soothes them to do that, or it soothes them to be able to present it objectively to other people who may weigh in on the situation and be able to go, and such an expert informed me that this means this and that happened, so therefore. But again, because it was falling on the nose, this is about like the inner sense of knowing, the psychic sense, having the smell of something without necessarily being able to logically and objectively categorize why. So I think that if that is you, it's actually, it's not the best pursuit. It's not the best use of your time, just because, again, it's this like a very frustrating energy. I'm sorry to relay it, but it's like no one can ever know, right? There's always exceptions to all of these fixed rules about this thing means this thing, and particularly in a connection that's as complex as this, or an attempt to work together that has as much nuance in the backdrop as this has had. Like trying to prove that one person's stance is this and I know it and that's final is yet another way to project and exert control. And I hope that it makes sense why, right? It's like fulfilling the person's need for certainty to be able to say, well, of this I am sure. But the purpose of this dynamic, is not to be sure. It's not to be certain of anything. I'm now hearing How Can You Be Sure by Radiohead, right? This isn't a fixed dynamic. And I don't mean that there won't be certain outcomes or that things won't ever sort of tie up in a particular way. What I mean is that what it was here to teach both of you is about the grey area, the tonal area, right? And we did get a colour tone. There is a balance of energies here, which is rare to see in this circular setup. And I do think that, you know, when we spoke about not being reductive astrologically, that sort of pertains to the whole thing situationally as well, right? We're not going to reduce the situation to say, oh, it's all martial, it's all fire, or it's all swords, or, you know, whatever it is, or it's all emotional. There is a balance of different things going on here. There is material and financial factors, even if they are like locational, for instance. There are emotional factors from each side, which are very different and complex. There is passion, there is getting fired up, there is getting defensive, but it's also tempered by the introduction of certain logics and certain ways of operating in a communicational context. And none of these things are more true than the other, right? But your job, in particular, is to understand what it is that you know about you. Okay, I'm going to distance out and kind of Rorschach this. I've made a few references to superheroes in the rest of this reading, and actually the way that the seeds are falling, if I blur my eyes, it gives John kind of a superhero mask. So there is an energy with this defensiveness, perhaps on both sides, but certainly from their side, that defending a particular idea or choice or pattern is almost like a form of vigilante justice. It's like a cause that they will die on the hill of, or would die on the hill of, prior to this thing between you making their understanding more complex. And because there were swords, and because of the way that these are scattered and the emphasis up here and sort of some stuff here going on shape-wise, I feel like they might be somebody who's very good at articulating their position and who almost relies upon being an advocate for a particular way of being, and has perhaps changed their position in the course of knowing you on something related to your dynamic, but can't articulate yet why they did that, even though they know it's right. So again, with this knows versus the use of language. So how does that play out circumstantially and like literally? Well, for instance, if this person always said, I don't want to be an employee, I want to be self-employed, I want to go my own way, I want to be an entrepreneur and do all these things, in the course of meeting you, they may have had some kind of underground recognition of the stability of being an employee, but also doing other things on the side with that structure in place, or vice versa, right? They could have been very structured and they could have met you and opened up to the possibility of doing it differently and quitting the day job and just being like, right, I'm good at this, I'm going to live off that. If it was more of a kind of relationship or sexual connection, this could have been somebody who was perhaps incredibly good at explaining to people why they were ethically poly, and meeting you, they feel more monog, or vice versa, right? Or it could be that they were very much in the camp of, I believe in traditional marriage and maybe even babies, and we buy a house together and relationships go like this. And these are the stages, these are the bases, right? And anyone who oversteps the boundary of those bases is who I'm defensive with and who I say, sorry, we're not for each other. And then in the process of meeting you, that structure has become more permeable, more Piscean. And perhaps the order in which they would traditionally do things in order to adhere to that structure and keep themselves safe in a way has been blown out of the water, right? Again, with all this water imagery. These are just examples, but you get what I mean with that kind of like the way that they were operating is something that they're very comfortable in, but more than that, they're very good at expressing to other people. And I think that in coming across you, it's like now they know they're wrong, but they can't yet explain why. And that's like pissing them off a bit. Or this might be you. This might be some of the stuff you have to examine, right? Is it that you're feeling the vibe of a different direction, but because you don't know how to articulate and prove it to somebody else outside of it, you feel like, well, it can't possibly be correct. There's stuff like that going on somewhere. And this kind of mask of the vigilante is like, I'm going to fight for this no matter what, even if it's illegal, even if I could get myself killed, even if I don't have superpowers, right? And then suddenly, it's like the vigilante comes out of that position and they're just a human and they kind of have to process what their purpose is and also kind of continue to watch the injustices in the world play out and really weigh up whether they were fighting for the right thing, whether they were fighting in the right way, because obviously the sort of impetus of superhero narratives is about that ethical conundrum, right? So there's a lot of that, like, again, on both sides, there's, am I even on the correct quest, bro? Because I met this person and they questioned everything. Or they made me question everything, should I say. Porkchop Express here, the eye was drawn there and some of these are kind of pointing to it from where I was at. And that makes me think of Chunking Express, which is very dear to me, which then makes me think of the line, sorry to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, click off now if you haven't, because it's fantastic and you should watch it, because everyone should, because it's maybe one of the best films ever made, but sorry, bias. But it finishes with a girl who has become an air hostess giving a napkin boarding pass to someone really significant in her life and saying, where do you want to go? Meaning, where is this connection? Where is this reconciliation? Where is this new agreement with our matured selves even going? And the response from the other character is deep eye contact and wherever it is you want to take me, right? So there's a coming together and a saying, we're clearly not the same people we were. We're clearly not moving in the same direction that we were moving in. We have clearly both been faced with aspects of this which we can't say for certain are this way or that way. And we're moving through it instinctively, no matter how good we were at logic prior. But what we can do is surrender to the element of the connection that was the other person, to the third thing coming in with the trickster energy between the two polarities and saying, have you tried this, right? So in him saying, wherever you want to take me, this person who was the more traditional of the two, and actually who was a policeman, so again, that may hit from the beginning, is saying to somebody who was very sort of a bit chaotic and didn't know who she was yet, listen, I will follow your lead. I trust you, right? So there's trust in the relationship there. There's trust in the universe to direct you, just as it directed you to interactions with this person, in the correct path for both of you, right? And to take the situation broader. It's interesting as well that I've put this on an album that, I believe it's called Anthologies, is that right? Yeah, Anthology. So this is like it's a best of, which speaks to you guys ruminating on certain moments together and trying to decode what they mean. And decoding is coming up with this being in a different language as well from my native tongue. But also in that, anthology is a good way of understanding your interactions so far. You're not looking at this linear story, which will have a Hollywood twist ending. You're looking at an anthology of interconnected tales that all speak to a central theme. And actually, that's what chunking is, right? Chunking is, I believe, 2 stories. It was, I think it was like 3 or 4. It was filmed back to back with a film called Fallen Angels, which is just as great in a different way. But it was just stories about a certain section of Hong Kong where people kind of pass each other, and some of them fall in love with each other, and some of them get arrested, and some of them are the arresting party, and some of them, you know, lose a person, or, you know. But the combining thing is that they all move through this certain area and pass inches from each other within time and space, right? And then you sort of follow the next one. And in the same way, I think a good frame for re-examining this connection and your position in it is to look at the broader picture of, like, we just so happened to be in this area of time and space and both moving through this thing, and this person was at this stage, so I came across them in this way, etc., etc. And sort of looking at the bigger currents happening around all of the components, rather than just looking at, I think this and this person thinks this and those things aren't compatible. You're looking at an entire anthology of stories, not the one story. And both John Carpenter and Wong Kar-wai, who I'm referencing there with the other film, they're very good at speaking about moments in time that may have kind of larger or bigger or more, you know, magically complex consequences for everybody concerned. And there is both a call then to expand your horizons to the bigger picture, but also recognize within the moment that you need to actually be there, right? My last reading was about that, being present with a being who just wants you to kind of intuit how to respond to them, rather than taking the advice of everyone around you. And there is a certain level of that happening here where, yes, it's about the broader picture and understanding that, but it's also about bringing yourself back into the present moment when you're actually with them in order to respond correctly, not going into future thinking, not going into mind reading, not going into catastrophizing, not going into being riled up about their beliefs or their actions in the past, and instead just being with them, with who they are now, and seeing both of you as the entry of one story in a full anthology of complex, multifaceted stories about the way the universe works. If you did like, hit the thumbs up, please subscribe. I will possibly see you in the next one, but do check out the playlist for the lucky dip readings of whatever. And I hope you do find me again. Let me know how it resonated, if it resonated, what kind of stuff you'd like to see here, etc. And take care.